all for coming today. And thank you, lovely people, for sponsoring me. And I just feel so privileged. I feel so lucky. I do. I feel so fortunate that so many people I know are like, oh, COVID is so tough, and it wears us all down. But I get excited when I wake up on Wednesdays because that's my day to be in Alberta. I love interacting with all of you. And I really enjoyed being able to train in trauma-informed care for folks with disabilities, and the interaction was so great. So I just want to say thank you. I feel so lucky and so privileged to be here today and to be connected to all of you and the good work that you do. So I think today, a lot of what I'm going to say is, as always, things we all know already, but we're going to say it a little differently. And so this is not, it's not like big revelations, but I just think that it's important for us to talk about trauma-informed leadership. If we're going to talk about trauma-informed care for people with disabilities, we need to talk about that frontline professional supporting them. And that's a big key. That's a big key. That frontline support is everything, right? And so, as we said on the trauma-informed care training, trauma is the elephant in the room when we look at the lives of people with disabilities. But I believe it's also the elephant in the room when we look at who's supporting and how can we support the supporters. Because today, what I'm going to show you and what I'm going to talk about is that there's a broad range of trauma that we all bring to the table, and that in particular is unique to that direct support worker. So I just want to really kind of lay out today some of the issues that people grapple with. Some of the things that we already know, some of the things you're already grappling with, but put the questions out there. I'm not sure that I have the answers. In fact, I'm sure I don't, but I want to ask the questions, and I want us to look at, okay, what are the real needs? And if we're really committed to supporting people with disabilities, with intellectual and developmental disabilities, we've got to support the supporters, right? Because that's key. And I have had a lot of interesting experiences, particularly in the last few years, of working with different agencies and seeing places do things differently and seeing the unique challenges in the world of IDD services. So one big issue, and I know John Raphael and Joe Macbeth in the NADSP organization, which is so wonderful, they have worked so hard in the States, and I know they're doing a lot of work in Canada as well, to really highlight the lack of professionalization in the direct support position. That in the States, there's labor codes for, different types of jobs. So, you're a nurse, you've got a code, you're a teacher, you've got a code, then you're on track to get, it's regarded as a professional position. You have to pay a certain amount. You have to have certain professional, just benefits have to be there on a certain level. Nothing in the States for the frontline worker, nothing. So John Raphael and Joe Macbeth have been fighting very hard to change this. It hasn't changed yet, but at least they've put this issue out there. They have legislation and they're fighting. So, and I know you probably will be hearing more about that, but how does that feel when you're working your heart out, right? When you're working with folks that have unique challenges, like we talked about in our earlier training, folks that come to us with all kinds of trauma and all kinds of experiences and all kinds of issues, and you have the most important job in the agency, in the field, and it's not professionalized. It's not looked at as we look at a teacher, or as we look at any professional position. So that's number one. And that that has to change. And that affects people, right? That's a societal view. And that lack of societal support is a giant issue. That's a giant issue because you tell your family, I'm a direct support worker, or this is what I'm doing. And people are like, oh, well, okay, you're doing that job now. Well, what kind of career goals do you have? That's not looked at as a career. Right? And so people aren't even, so many folks have said to me, my family doesn't get the work I do. My family doesn't get that I'm really proud of what I do every day. And my friends don't get it. And all anyone ever says is, oh, you must have so much patience, and not understand how important and meaningful this work is because society doesn't support it. So that's really tough when you work as hard and you have to stretch as much as folks on the front line have to stretch. That's really challenging. And there's lack of opportunities for true community integration. So this is another giant issue. Again, I'm not telling you things you don't know already, but I want to put it in the context of what do we set staff up for? How are they struggling in ways we might not even appreciate? Or many of you may have been staff on the front line. I was as well. And I forgot it because that was many years ago. When we say I've been in the field for over 25 years, it's a lot over 25 years. I'm old as the hills. And that was my first experience, was being on the front line. And, it's easy to forget how it's not really regarded as a position of professionalism, and it's not always respected. And then there's not the opportunities for community integration. So right now in the States, there's a lot of pressure because of Medicaid, and a lot of people have said, okay, you have to, every day you have to be, make sure your folks are in the community. The community is everything. The community is everything. And honestly, our communities aren't embracing in ways that they should be. And there's big push, well, everybody needs to get a community job. Well, employment isn't looking to employ, and many organizations aren't open to employing folks with disabilities. So the reality is we're pushing staff, at least where I come from, to integrate on a community level, and then they go and there's no opportunities, or the opportunities are very slim and very limited. And their opportunities may be for 10%. So people end up driving around and becoming tourists in their community rather than really being integrated. And then who takes the heat? The frontline worker. So they're pushed to do things that society isn't supporting. And that is stressful. And then there's turnover, right? Turnover is really, really tough. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems in our field. I'm not telling you, again, anything you don't know. But I've had the privilege of consulting with agencies in the last 5 or 6 years. And I've just gotten opportunities to go and visit agencies and train staff and spend several days with them and listen to their problems. And 2 agencies come to mind. So in one agency that I went to, and I won't name them, they were just talking about how horrible. See, those are apple turnovers, by the way. I know they look tasty, and it's morning time for you guys. Turnover. So in one agency that I went to, they were constantly complaining about their staff. And they were saying, yes, we need to be trauma-informed. We really get the trauma-informed approach, but we'll never get our staff to get it. And sometimes they said things like that kind of in front of the staff. And then they're complaining a lot about turnover. And I'm like, but you're kind of putting them down. You're saying things in front of them about how they're not getting things that when you roll them out, and how they don't do things. And there's this kind of negative view, and that has an impact. And sure enough, when I said to them, well, don't worry, in the US, the average turnover rate is 40%. Like, that's high, right? They said, oh, ours is much higher. Well, you're talking about how bad your staff are all the time. This could be a key. And then I went to another agency, and in this other agency, which will also remain nameless, in a different state, I mean, they were a wonderful agency and they did some really innovative things, but they said, that they were saving money by having no house managers, in residential settings, no one who was responsible for the house was in the house. And then they had the supervisor had like 6 or 7 houses. And I came from an agency and worked in an agency that did the same thing, and they did that to save money. But then it created so much stress because that frontline worker didn't get to interact with their supervisor, didn't get that support, didn't have anyone in that home who was the buck stops here person, that final person. And that created a lot of stress. And there they had very high turnover, as in the agency that I came from. So those two issues we'll talk more about, but those two agencies, and then the third that I actually had worked in, where they made the frontline management support so thin, that level was so thin that these people had maybe 30, 40 direct reports. You can't do that. And we have this other situation where they were just looking at the staff as people who we know don't do their job well and will never get this and never get that. 2 situations where they had extremely high turnover. 3 really, because the one that I came from. Then I went to another place. And this place was in Canada, of course, because you guys are the coolest. You are so cool. Let's just face it. You're so much cooler than we are. And we know this. We're trying to improve, but slow. So they were practicing gentle teaching. So I don't know how many of you know about gentle teaching. It's a wonderful approach from John McGee. I should have a picture of him, and I don't. John McGee taught how to dialogue and support people with intellectual disabilities, even when they don't use words, to listen. And that was like the center cornerstone of his approach. And he would demonstrate it by sitting and just being with people and being very present with them. And people that had lots of behavioral issues would calm down. So I went to this place, and they were practicing gentle teaching, which was why they invited me, because I had written about that as in the context of trauma-informed care. But they had taken it to a whole nother level. And they were doing gentle teaching, or listening, supporting, nurturing of the direct support worker. So what they did was to support that frontline person so much, talking to them. Each one would have a monthly meeting with the executive director. The executive director poured all his energy into nurturing the frontline staff. Everybody would meet with him. Maybe it was every other month, but it was at least every other month. And I think he tried for monthly. He would talk to people about their career goals. He would support people in different situations, and you could apply for a scholarship to go to school, through the agency, and have the agency pay. And he would ask you, if you were doing that, how school is, what's going on. Very involved. And he really held his management to a very high standard, where they had to be as involved and supportive of the frontline staff. And then what do you know? The folks that they were supporting all did better. Turnover there was 4%. I'd never seen anything like it. 4%. I was so humbled. The place where I came from was over 40%. We were like 42%. And I was like, oh, I learned so much. because of the nurturing and the gentleness and the approach with that frontline staff. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't fire someone if they did something horrible every now and then, but people tried not to do horrible things because they felt that someone was invested in them, and that made a giant difference. And then finally, the lack of funding. Need I say more? Need I say more? We'll be talking about that a little bit more as well. Okay, so the sources of trauma in the lives of the direct support professional. So this is the other reality. A lot of the folks that come to the jobs, at least in the places where I've worked, and in my career, I've mainly worked inside of provider agencies. When I just consult, I get very full of myself. So I had to rein myself back in and go work inside of agencies. And I've always been, either working in some capacity or another inside of, for over 30 years inside of different provider agencies. And, it has always been just so difficult to see and to know the poverty that many of the frontline staff come from or are struggling with, and the low wages. The low wages are so tough, and the background of poverty. So, we in one place where I worked, the residential director would complain bitterly about how staff didn't know basic aspects of taking care of a house, right? Things to do in a house, things to check on. And finally, someone said, do you know most people in our agency did not grow up in homes that they owned? Most people grew up in situations where their family never owned a home. No one owned a home. They don't know how. And we're writing them up and punishing them for not doing things that we just assume everyone knows how to do. That no way. Right? Racism. Racism is a reality. So it's a reality that we deal with very, very, very directly in the States. And we all think it doesn't happen where you are, but I'm sure you can tell me stories. But racism is a reality, and it is a source of trauma. And people bring this. So I'm talking about what the folks are bringing when they get interviewed with us and they get this job, what they're bringing with them. Often it's a background of poverty. Often it's a background of having experienced racism, immigration difficulties. I am so in awe of you all. Again, I'm just such a fan that you have so many new Canadians where we closed our doors. You opened them, and people come there, but they come there with, my gosh, experiences that I would not have been able to survive. Really, anyone that's been through being a refugee or having to run somewhere and leave everything, so much trauma. And then you get this job, and you're supposed to support people right away and know what you're doing, but yet you've got all this trauma, and you've lost everything, or you're worrying about people you've left behind, or people you love have died, right? And you're just supposed to be present and here and doing it. It's really tough. And this is what we're dealing with. And it's great that we have expectations. We should have expectations, but we also have to understand the lives of so many of the folks that are there working every day, day in, day out, and what they've been through, losses, and then COVID. So So many staff that I know have gotten COVID, people in agencies that I'm working with right now. I'm consulting, doing groups, doing individual therapy, but 3 groups with different agencies and doing therapy. And the folks we support have gotten COVID. Some folks have passed away. Staff have gotten COVID, and we've lost some staff. In Maryland, we've lost over 50 people with intellectual disabilities, and that's really hard on the staff. And then we've lost at least 22 staff. COVID. And we're going to be dealing with the trauma of COVID for a long time. So this isn't something that's going to go away. This is something where we need to really support each other and be sensitive to the losses that people have experienced. Oh, it's been very tough, right? I'm not telling you again anything you don't know, but let's think about the impact of it. And staff have risked their lives going into homes day in, day out, day in, day out. Most places in the US do not pay any extra. There's no hazardous duty pay. There's nothing extra. There's just an expectation that you do it. And how terrifying, right? Particularly in the beginning, when we didn't know what we didn't know, and when treatment wasn't as good, but it's still bad. So it's tough. A lack of a living wage. This is a theme. This is a theme over and over again. Most of the people that I have worked with on the front line have worked always at least 2 jobs. And some places where I work, because of labor laws, they would not let people work 2 different jobs in the same agency. So they're running back and forth to different agencies. Some people 3 jobs. And then they fall asleep on the job and they get fired for sleeping on the job. I've seen that happen over and over again, and it just is so heartbreaking. I'd be sleeping too. How can you work 3 jobs? The worst incident that I ever saw, that was terrible. So there was a staff person, and he beat and hurt a person with a disability. And this guy with a disability did not use words and made a lot of sounds and often didn't sleep at night. And this guy he beat him and he was arrested and he's in jail. But then when we looked into what happened, the circumstances that happened, he had worked 4 consecutive shifts because other staff had quit. The manager had begged him to keep working and told him, don't worry about it. You can do the overnight, but you can sleep. It's okay. So he was exhausted from 2 days of not sleeping, trying to sleep. And then this guy, was up all night making sounds, and the person lost it. And then when we looked back on the whole incident, well, anyone would have been out of their mind not sleeping for 2 days, and then they couldn't sleep the one time. The manager said, well, it'd be okay to sleep during this time. Yeah, it was wrong to beat him up. That was very bad. He just lost it and started hitting him and saying, you're out of sleep, stop it, leave me. And that was one of the worst situations I've ever seen because he hurt that guy. I mean, I've seen a lot of bad things. Yeah, I'm sure you have too. But it all came back to the fact that he was working for the overtime. The manager was begging him to keep going for it. And he was like, yeah, I'll go, because he had, and so many people that I know come to depend on that overtime, right? Because then that becomes, they buy more things and that's how they pay the bills. So, and that just takes its toll. It takes its toll. You need to sleep. You can't work all the time. And yet this goes on. So how can we pull back? How can we look at the fact that that frontline person needs the support? If we ever expect to be trauma informed and supportive of the folks with disabilities, we're going to have to figure out how to support that front line. And I know many of you already do. And this is figured out in many places, and many people are doing great. But I do this training because I feel it's so important to highlight these issues and for us to explore what's really needed and where, because there are places that aren't doing it. And I've worked there, and I've been part of the problem. And we've all said, oh, yes, we need to pay the staff more. And oh, yes, we need to not make them work overtime. And oh, yes, we need to solve all these problems. And then we haven't. So I've been a part of it too. A lot of what I do is penance. Gotta tell you that. And then people will also bring with them adverse childhood experiences. And we know from the many ACE studies and adverse childhood experience studies that your childhood and your trauma in your childhood affects you. And 1 out of 6 people in the States have over 4 significant childhood traumas. This was a study done originally by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the States in Atlanta, and Kaiser Permanente, big insurer. And not only did they look at adverse childhood experiences and how they affect people, they looked at what all the outcomes are. Disruptive neurodevelopment. A lot of people then can't function cognitively as well. Social, emotional impairment, health, high risk health behaviors, and disease and early death. So adverse childhood experiences have an impact, and many people, all of us have something, but we're bringing, oftentimes that direct support person is bringing their adverse childhood experiences with them. And in some cases, it can be so beautiful because people have the most empathy and the most understanding. But then they also have maybe ways in which they get triggered, ways in which they're vulnerable, difficulties with certain issues. And this is just a reality. And then there's the traumas of the system, the little t's. So, I've talked about the big T traumas, right? And the little t traumas. So that's an important concept, I think, when we talk about trauma, that we know the smaller traumas also affect people. Again, the inability to make a living wage with one position. And the difficult and sometimes conflicting regulations and policies. I have found in many places that I've worked that creates so much stress. The safety department tells you have to do this, this, and this to be safe. The quality assurance people say you have to do this, this, and this to ensure quality. And, the residential people say you have to get your folks out and in the community and doing this, this, and this. And you're driving around with people you're not necessarily feeling safe driving with, and you only have one staff. But the safety people say you better not, have a fender bender or do anything wrong in any way. And so many different messages. There's so many different policies and rules descending on this one staff person who has to follow them all, right? And then paperwork on top of it. And technology. So in many places that I'm working now or consulting with, now I'm just consulting with different places, everybody's moving to doing everything online, which is great if you're, under 40 and this is what you automatically do. And it's really tough for people in 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s, who are now expected to do half their job and log in and do so much online. And that's not coming so easy. So I had a wonderful friend, older woman, who was just the best, grandmother to so many people, full of love, best staff in the world. And she had to quit. She's like, I can't keep up. I can't learn it. I can't do it. And boy, do the people she supported miss her. And she didn't want to quit, but she's like, it's more than I can do. And that lack of respect, that sometimes, I know I worked in one place where they would hire these young privileged people with master's or bachelor's degrees, sometimes masters, to supervise staff who had worked for 30 years or 20 years in their positions. And in many cases, those managers were white and the staff were Black. The managers had never worked in a house and had no clue, but they had this degree. This is one agency that I worked in, and it created a lot of problems and it created a lot of tension, and that lack of respect, because they didn't know what they didn't know, really impacted turnover, boy. Lots of people quit. Said, I'm not working for this person who doesn't respect me and doesn't realize what needs to be done and isn't listening to me. Finally, that agency, I was, now here I won't take responsibility for that problem, because I kept screaming at them that we have to be able to promote from within and get rid of the regulation that or the requirement of a bachelor's degree for managers. And they finally did, and turnover has gone down. You know, some situations just are very tough for people to work in. That probably doesn't happen where you are. And, you know, dealing with the difficult behavioral situations and being blamed. So there I am, again, a little bit responsible, where this Joe has a behavior problem. Joe has an incident. And what do? We focus on what the staff did wrong. And yeah, maybe the staff didn't handle it right, but maybe we didn't support that person. Maybe my behavior plan was horrible and didn't make any sense anyway. And I had too many words and it wasn't clear. Too many big terms that didn't really translate into English. I've done that. And that poor person is blamed for not following the plan when we didn't train in the plan in a way that could really be understood. And when the plan maybe didn't address all the real issues going on. And when that person already had all those other stressors. And then we discipline them. And, you know, I've worked places, I'm sure we've all worked places where there's a really punitive disciplinary system and everybody's just waiting to get in trouble. How can you do your best work when you're waiting to get in trouble and you get in trouble for small, petty things? Get in trouble for the big stuff. I agree with that. And sometimes people need to be fired. I understand that. And I think that actually sets a good tone. But those little nitpicking, constant issues where people are overly punished for small things really creates morale problems. Like, like we all know this, but yet sometimes systems evolve, and provider systems can evolve without realizing it into, you know, very detailed punitive systems where you better dot that I and cross that T, and you better, you know, log something in and do it right. I know in Maryland, we're switching payment to whether it's all online and you have to log in the times you've worked with somebody directly. And if you didn't do that, you don't get paid. So of course, people are getting in all kinds of trouble because they're not thinking about doing that. So how can we support instead of punish? For the small things, the picky things. That creates its own trauma when you're thinking you're going to be fired every day. You don't do your best work. Isolation is a big issue. I'm getting everybody depressed, right? I'm so sorry. I'm getting depressed myself. This is kind of depressing. I was all cheered up about seeing the Canadians because I love you guys, and now I'm getting depressed. But these are the realities and the isolation. So, you know, that along with that lack of opportunity for face-to-face supervision is really a big deal. So the awake overnight often never sees a supervisor. The weekend staff never sees a supervisor. In these situations that I've worked in and that I've consulted in where they don't have somebody responsible in the home, nobody's getting that supervision or that support. And it's so tough. To be this isolated and have to do such a difficult job is just not doable. It's too much. People need to be connected. You know, I've stayed in jobs far too long because I loved my coworkers so much. You need that, community of coworkers. You need to help each other. But if you're not even seeing your coworker, they're clocking in, you're clocking out, and you're not with anyone else, and you're not seeing your manager, and you don't have team meetings. And so many times the person on the front line is not included in the team meeting because of their shift, because they work another job, because of whatever, but they're not even feeling a part of the team. That isolation is very tough. And that creates turnover because you don't want to stay in a job where you don't feel a part of things. And when you don't have that opportunity for face-to-face supervision and it hasn't been figured out, then that makes it worse. And again, the lack of respect. I'm hammering that one home. So the trauma of racism and violence. So in the States, these horrible murders have happened and they impact people, but it's been happening for decades. And people are bringing so many bad experiences to the job. And then sometimes they're experiencing racism on the job. Sometimes people are expected to be called names and know that it's from a person with a disability, so it's okay. And it's still a trigger and it's still very difficult. We're expecting a whole lot of things. And that's tough. That's tough. I have worked, I just want to cry when I tell you this because I've worked mainly with a lot of staff from Baltimore and Baltimore City. And I can think of 5 different people I know whose sons were killed on the streets of Baltimore. And they're just, they take a week off and then they're back at work and expected to keep going. And that's another reality that's very tough. How can we support more? I think that's what we have to ask. Like, how can we give that trauma-informed, trauma support leadership? So Van Dernet Lipsky and, okay, I don't have Connie's last name. That's not quite cool, is it? Oops. Sorry about that. I will get that for you. But Laura Van Dernet Lipsky, and I'm pretty sure it's Connie Brown. Sorry about that, Connie Brown. Have written about trauma exposure and trauma exposure response. So when you're exposed, what they say is when you're exposed to people and you're working with people with trauma, it really affects you. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you have no trauma at all, which is hard to be on planet Earth and have no trauma at all. But if there's nothing at all, you're not bringing anything to it. And yet you've got this experience of working with people with trauma and working in tough situations and working where there's behavioral incidents and tough things. And the trauma exposure response involves exhaustion, numbness and disconnection. Negative, tough things start to seem normal, so you don't realize when something's really wrong, and then you get in trouble for not addressing it. You get consumed by your work. People start working all the time and then they burn out. They don't take care of themselves and there's no balance. And they write about this and that it's actually really devastating to work day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out in these high stress situations where people are traumatized and where there's a lot going on. It affects you. So I worked in one place where we had very, very involved folks. A lot of the people we took had a lot of childhood trauma. We took a bunch of people straight from jail. They had been locked up for different things and they had been, abused and neglected and they would do all kinds of stuff. We had folks that were suicidal. We had folks attacking other people. And so one thing we started doing was training staff in all different people and rotating them in and out and rotating them around homes so that people would get, different situations and not be totally burned out by working day in, day out with a very high-end, high-demanding person. And that seemed to help and make a difference. Also, we started, at that place, we had a vacation payout where staff could just cash in their vacation for money. So all these people were never taking vacations because we all always need money, right? And they always need money, as you can understand. But then the boss increased the vacation time and instituted something where you couldn't do a vacation payout unless you had a certain amount of days that you took. And you had to take, you were required to take days off. So that's how they were dealing there with the trauma exposure response, because we realized it was a big problem and it did make a difference. Okay. So we want to look at instead of that fear-based, like you're going to get in trouble, you're going to get written up, you're in trouble if you do this, and we roll out policies of those, this is what not to do, this is what you're going to be in trouble for. Instead of that, we want a support-based policy. And that's, I think, so important. Doesn't mean we don't have rules, doesn't mean people don't get fired when they do bad things, doesn't mean we don't have policies that we practice. That's all very important. But the underlying approach of support makes all the difference, and that reduces turnover. And let's explore the ways in which it can happen. So, you know, I love this triangle, safety, connection, and empowerment. I changed it around a little. This is my thing, right? How can we create a trauma-informed culture in the world of IDD services? That's the issue. People need to feel safe in terms of someone has their back when they're doing their job. To feel connected, not to be isolated in their job, and to have empowerment. To have some control, some sense of I can affect things rather than I have no input at all. I'm not saying, you know, shared management, but I am saying there has to be some listening going on the management end. So let's break it down. Safety, connection, empowerment. You know, that's my thing. So safety, what is safety in management? Consistency. I've talked to so many people who have told me that their boss likes this one, so this one gets all these privileges and doesn't like that one and doesn't like them, and so they're going to quit. Or they know that the boss parties with Joe and Cindy, but the boss doesn't invite them to happy hour and doesn't party with them, and they're just left out of the circle, and that's why everyone's against them. Or, you know, when Joe does X, Y, and Z, he doesn't get in trouble, but I do X, Y, and Z, and I get written up. I mean, I wish I had a nickel for every time somebody has told me that. And it's what causes you to quit. This is a big, big source of turnover, right? That lack of consistency and a lack of fairness. So safety and management means that your manager is consistent, not playing favorites, not giving more to this one person and giving less to the other, not doing anything along those lines. It's hard. It's a challenge, I know. Sometimes we hire our friends or we're friends with the people, but we still, that's the challenge for us. I know for me, you know, I've hired some friends and I've had to act like we weren't friends, but I didn't do it very well. I just made friends with everyone. That really worked better for me. But that consistency and fairness is so key if we want to keep people and we want them to feel safe. Policies have to be clear. So, you know, every job I've worked at, I get this big notebook, right? Now I get it online. Here's our policies and procedures. Boom. Okay, who's really reading that, right? And then maybe you have a training where they go over and blah, 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 you know, 100 miles an hour, and then do this and then do that, and then blah, blah, blah. But we have to make our policies clear. And we have to be consistent with them, and we have to update them. Like, look at what we had to do with COVID. This has been crazy. So it's very tough, and it's tough for management, but we have to keep up with policy, and policy has to be implemented. And it has to be clear, because if you don't know the rules, you're far more worried that you're going to break them. And when you don't know the rules, or even worse, when the rules keep changing, then you don't know if you're good, you're bad. What did you do now? Oh my gosh, you might get written up. And this is another reason that people leave. Well, they said this, but I did that, but then I got in trouble for this, and they never said I couldn't do that. And update it. So most of the places, and I mean, I was responsible for this too. Oh yeah, I forgot to, it's been 5 years, I haven't updated the policy. Whereas we're doing things totally different. So we need to do this and need to be communicating it. And I think it's ideal when we can have input into the policy with the understanding that, yeah, we really want your input, but it doesn't mean we're going to do what you say you want us to do, but we want to hear and we want to have input, because I think that's important where we're relevant, we're applicable, and needs to be accessible. We need to listen. Being safe often means being listened to. I know I've worked with a lot of people who told me, I really appreciated when someone sat down and listened to me. It doesn't even mean that they went and fixed the problem. So at my last job, we had this wonderful, wonderful HR person. And she just made sure she had a team of great people, because she supervised them and was very strict with them. Said, anyone goes through anything, anyone complains about anything, you sit down and you listen and you take it seriously. And they took everybody seriously, and they helped so much, and they really reduced turnover because people felt heard. And they would then hold the managers to that. Like, okay, you're going to have to come in and listen to this person say what was wrong, not fixing it always. So sometimes we don't want to listen because we're worried as managers that listening means I have to fix it. And I know I can't fix it. So let's just keep going, keep doing our jobs. And, we'll talk about that later, because managers are feeling like they can't fix it. But just listening really helps people to feel much safer in their jobs. If you think about jobs that you have and maybe have had in the past, when there's an issue and no one's listening, you often just want to leave. And maybe you did. But when you at least can be heard and be listened to, even if it doesn't get fixed right away, you have a sense of having some kind of input, having some kind of, safety net where you can express yourself and not get fired for it. I think that's really important, and we have to figure out how to do it. And that's, again, respect. And that communication of caring. How many of you have worked somewhere where we care, and then half the people get fired that didn't have to be fired or whatever, right? But just little things do show caring and do make a big difference. And I've seen managers communicate that caring in different ways. And it's amazing how just something really small can make such a big difference. I think all of us have experienced that. Maybe we've given something to people or we've gotten something, and what a difference it makes. Just a little thing. Connection. That face-to-face supervision. So studies have been done that have shown that face-to-face supervision reduces turnover. Now, we're so challenged in our field, right? Face-to-face, what is face-to-face when this person's only working, from 11 to 7 and I get in at 9, or when this person's working on weekends and I've got kids and I'm running them to soccer practice and everything else. And right. Well, now we have cell phones, FaceTime. We have all kinds of opportunities through technology, as we've learned in this era of COVID, to connect face-to-face. And if we can set up systems in which everybody has face-to-face supervision once a month, you're going to see a big difference. And maybe many of you do that, and maybe you do it weekly, and maybe you do it better. But in the States, in the world of disabilities, that's a very tough issue. And without regular connections with the supervisor, it's very tough. That connection, that relationship with your boss is so important. And it's so important that it's just not only in times of crisis, right? What did you do about this? And what do we need now? Or in times of demand. We've got to have this, we've got to have that. And the only time you get that call is when something is needed. That really affects morale. And let's remember what people have brought, the kind of trauma they've brought to their job, then the kind of trauma they're dealing with and absorbing from folks. It's tough. It's tough. So that a consistent supervision, month to month, face to face, to just hear the issues, for that supervisor to be listening really, really addresses so much. And that a sense of safety, a sense of connection, and a sense of empowerment all come from that face-to-face time. Figuring it out. If I'm going to FaceTime with the weekend overnight, I'm going to figure out a way to FaceTime with them. If we're going to, connect with that early morning staff, we're going to do it on Zoom. Whatever it is, for that person to get a monthly face-to-face will really help them to stay, to feel connected, to feel a part of a team, to feel lack of isolation, and to feel like I belong at this job. And that's a critical piece. Meetings of teams on a regular basis, however we can do it, I knew one manager, she did an amazing job, and she'd have the computer there and they would Zoom in. She'd have the staff in the circle who could be there physically, and she'd have the other ones coming in like we do school now and Zooming in, and everybody would have input. Everybody would go around. She did it twice a month, no matter what. And everybody felt a part of that team, and she had so little turnover. And her staff worked so hard because they felt a part of a team. They felt a part of something. They felt appreciated. They felt respected. And they were heard. And then they would solve problems together. Sometimes she would have to say, here's what we're going to do. This is the new policy, and we're going to do it. But other times they would brainstorm. She was a brilliant, brilliant manager. They would brainstorm about issues, and then they would tell me, or they would tell the nurse, they would tell me what they came up with in order to deal with a behavioral issue, and that they wanted to try this, and how did I feel about it? And I'm like, great, let's go for it. They tell the nurse, we're worried about, his sugar being too high, and this is what we're thinking of doing, and blah, blah, blah. And the nurse would be great, and then she'd be on board with it, but they would be coming up with that themselves first. So people felt a part of wanting to implement it, and they felt excited. They were heard. Verbal communication in addition to written. So if all the communication you ever get is written, that again can be demoralizing, to have that talk. That supplements. If you've got the face-to-face supervision, that's great. But then the rest of the month, it's just emails. It's not enough. Every now and then, let's talk. Oh, I have something to tell you, rather than I'm just going to send this email. It makes a difference. And responsiveness. So I've known people who have quit because their boss never answered the phone. In fact, somebody was just telling me the other day that they feel completely demoralized about talking to their supervisor about this issue that we're both having with the individual that I'm doing therapy with. He's like, well, they're not going to answer the phone. They never get back to me. They're not going to want to do this. You're going to need to call them. It's like, I shouldn't have to do that. But it's true that when I make that phone call, that person gets back to me. But how demoralizing is that for the direct care person who's right there? That's terrible. But he was right. And the person got back to me right away. And then we looped in the direct support worker. This is a reality. It's something to talk about. Empowerment. So people should have some kind of domain that they're in charge of. And that's what management theory and research shows us. People stay in jobs longer, feel more supported when they have when they have something that they are creating and doing in some area where they've got some control, like even if it's something very small, where they're making some decisions and they're getting some trust from their management, and okay, I'm going to help John find a job. I've got some ideas. Let me go help John find a job. Yeah, go for it. Rather than, no, that's the job coach and you're not allowed to do that. I've seen both scenarios. That decision-making realm is clear and consistent. Yeah, this is your realm. Sometimes people make a decision and then they're told that wasn't their decision. That can be a trigger as well. I thought I could make that decision. Then people shut down, they become more passive. And before a consequence, feedback, right? Rather than, oh, you're in trouble, you're getting written up. When we see someone's drifting, okay, we need to let you know. You got to start being on time, rather than you just get that right up right away. These are management issues, but that have to do with, I feel, being trauma informed as well. Instruction and training available on an ongoing basis, like trauma informed care. Yay! But that we all know that, and I know you all do that because you wouldn't be here. But that I've had many staff say to me, well, when I get an opportunity to go to a training, I feel good because I feel like my boss is invested in me. And then I've had people say the opposite. I wanted to go to your training, but I felt like, I asked for it and I wasn't, they said I had to work my shift. And that makes me feel like, if they can't figure that out, they just really don't care. I've had people say that. And then we want to have that sense of leadership fostered in each person, because everybody is a potential future leader. Benjamin Zander talks about a wonderful concept called lead from any chair. And I've seen organizations where everybody can have some kind of input and is empowered in some way to take a leadership role. And those are places where people want to stay. Where I know one place formed many committees. And so every DSP was given the opportunity to be on a certain committee and to have real input and real involvement on that committee and do things. And people got excited about their job, leading from any chair, having that sense that I have input and I can have control. Really critical. Respect. Is that getting ridiculous the way I keep putting it in there? And training, of course, training, and more training. A need for empathy. Well, everyone needs empathy, and that's the reality. Managers need empathy. The empathy needs to go all the way up the line, and the board needs to have empathy for the executive director. Human beings need empathy. And sometimes when a manager says, wow, that must have been tough, just there is so helpful. I strongly believe in debriefing after any kind of difficult situation. I think it's so important, where we need to debrief. We need to sit down with the person that went through the incident and say, are you okay? Not tell them what they did wrong, not give them their write-up, but just say, are you okay? How are you doing? And let them just talk it out, because incidents, behavioral issues, they can be traumatizing, and people do need empathy and support in that debriefing process. The soft skills, the training for soft skills, listening, teaching staff to listen, teaching management to listen, building relationships. People need to be, I feel here, and this is why I have this piece on training and soft skills, because people need to feel that they are equipped. And the reality is we equip people in all kinds of skills. Maybe in Canada you do better, but in the States, we have bloodborne pathogens and med administration and all kinds of technical trainings, but we don't train people to listen. And the listening is so helpful when you're working with folks. Relationship building, we don't give skills in relationship building. Maybe some people do. But that's so important to how you're able to work with someone, is Can you build that relationship? Supporting that person, helping them to feel supported, and trauma-informed care. Yay for you. So many trauma-informed care trainers coming out. Thank you. This is really critical. I know that some of you have heard me talk about this study, and I'm sorry that I repeat myself. It's sad, isn't it? That's what happens when you get old. You just say things over and over again, like you just thought of it. Sorry. But this is an important study, and I like talking about it. Carol Dweck did it, and that's not a picture of her. That's just a teacher that I got off the internet. But you've heard me talk about this in the context of people with disabilities, where they took a classroom full of people who had, of kids who had average test scores and average grades, and they divided them up, and they told one set of teachers, these kids are gifted and talented. And they told another set of teachers with a different group of kids. They had group 1 and group 2. Group 1, they told the teachers they were gifted and talented. Group 2, they told the teachers that these kids had learning problems. The kids were all very similar. But where the teachers thought that they were really smart, those kids did so well. Many went ahead 1 or 2 grade levels. Where the teachers thought the kids were having learning problems, those kids either stayed the same, some went backwards. Let's apply that to management. How many of you have had a boss who really thought you were great, right? I had this one boss who used to tell me how smart I was. I turned into a genius every time I was around her. Like, I've got an idea how we can save money and help the people we support and make everyone really motivated. I had so many good ideas with her. Then I had this other boss who would say things like, you have a PhD? He was not a big morale builder. He put us all down. We used to say you had to come from a dysfunctional family to want to work there because then it felt comfortable. You know what I mean? And we got worse and worse. The more I was around him, the more I forgot things. I didn't do things right. The regard, the power of positive regard. Management. When management can convey positive regard and a positive expectation, like you're good, and we know you're good, and we know you really care about these folks, and we know you want to do a great job, then 9 out of 10 people are going to respond to that. And that 10th person needs to go anyway, right? Who are we kidding? But when that boss comes in and looks at all of them as they're totally messed up, you guys are a real crew. And we try to hire better people, but this is what we got. They're going to tank right in front of you. It's like that one agency I was in. Well, these staff aren't going to get it, and the staff are right there. Right? That how can we communicate a positive regard? So critical. We humans respond to things, and we're all human. When we respond to somebody respecting us and communicating a positive expectation and a definite high regard, we live up to that. And when people communicate a low regard, we often live up to that as well, or we live down to that. And this is another piece of trauma-informed leadership. To hold up the mirror of your best self. I know this is who you are. Rather than holding up the mirror of your worst self. Nah, you're a real screw up. It doesn't go well. And that's a big piece of management. That is Carol Dweck, I'm happy to tell you. I finally got a picture there of her. We all know my slides have issues, right? Finally, I got a picture of Carol Dweck and not just somebody off the internet. Fostering leadership. Fostering leadership. She talks about the growth mindset. She has a concept in education called not yet. And she teaches that if you have a set of learners, children, adults, whoever, and you are telling them that they're either succeeding or failing, then you're going to have a pretty large percentage of people who are going to try less and less, who are going to feel worse and worse about themselves because they're not the top of the rung, and they're going to go down. Versus when you have a growth mindset or what she calls not yet. And no one is being evaluated constantly. Instead, it's about what you're working on and your process. So she says, if you focus on process, and yeah, you haven't yet gotten it, but you're almost there, you can do this, rather than you didn't get it. You messed that up, but you almost did it, and we're going to try one more time. That growth mindset, process oriented, actually encourages learners, encourages people on the job, and okay, I'm going to try, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to try again, and rather than constantly being told what you didn't do or what you got wrong, but oh, you almost did it, and we're so close. Let's do one more thing. Oh, you got it. Very subtle, but very important. It's important in education, and it's important in management to help people value the process and feel good about their process. And finally, so important is that career ladder. I know NADSP has a wonderful system worked out for career ladders and having different levels of expertise in the frontline, organization. But I think everyone needs hope. And when it comes to being trauma informed, healing, and being able to be your best self, hope changes everything. And hope is that critical factor. So how can we really imbue staff with hope that, yeah, you can take it to the next level. You are, that's why I believe in that career ladder so strongly, and it should be open, and people should be able to earn promotions based on experience, and also see their leadership as people who have been on the front lines and feel a part of that team, feel respected. And that changes everything. So again, I think I've told you things you already know. We've put it together a little differently. Thank you so much.